Hello, YouTube divers. This is WaterDive 122, and today I want to welcome you all back to yet another episode of Magic Metal Mondays. Today we are going to be looking at one of my favorite bands of all time and the godfathers of heavy metal. Yep, we're talking about Black Sabbath. Um, so basically, Black Sabbath was the band that started the entire metal genre. I love Black Sabbath, especially all the stuff that they did with Ozzy Osbourne, and some of the Dio stuff, and of course some of the Tony Martin stuff. And the two albums where they had the one album that they had Ian Gillan on was okay, and the one album that they had Glenn Hughes on was okay. But you're gonna hear me ramble on about that. So without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 19, at the very bottom, no surprise here, 1995's Forbidden. You probably could have seen this coming from a mile away. This is probably at a lot of black. This is probably at the very, for a lot of people, it would be at the very bottom of their list when it comes to Black Sabbath albums. I could see why. I mean, it doesn't really feel like a Black Sabbath album. I mean, Tony Martin is an excellent singer. He's criminally underrated. He's definitely up there and one of my all-time favorite heavy metal vocalists, along with the likes of Michael Kiske and James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine and all those folks. But in my opinion, this album just doesn't feel like a Black Sabbath album. It feels very uninspired. It's also, in my opinion, it's also way too long. Some of the songs just don't really make a lot of sense. Like, there is one song on here, I don't remember what the name of that song is, but it featured like a hip-hop artist. What the heck? It's just no. Just no. It doesn't work. And sadly, this would be the final album of the Tony Martin era, and this would be the final album that Sabbath would put out for almost 18 years. So it's kind of sad that the Tony Martin era had to end on a very sour note. Number 18, the 1990 album TYR or Tear or Tur or Tear or Tur or Tear or Tur, whatever you pronounce it. However you pronounce it, excuse me. Like with Forbidden, this album, it's not really that good, but it's a bit better than Forbidden. Ironically, this album came out 5 years before Forbidden. But it's definitely a huge disappointment compared to the previous album, Headless Cross. It's a little bit of a disappointment compared to the album that followed it, which was Dehumanizer. I mean, I don't really like this album. I'd say it's just, average, below average. I mean, I love Tony Martin, don't get me wrong, but like on Forbidden, the band just doesn't really sound inspired anymore to do the stuff that they love. Or if you can even say that. I mean, Tony Iommi, there are some great riffs from Tony Iommi here and there. And of course, great vocal lines from Tony Martin, and some great drumming. I think Cozy Powell played on this album, if my memory serves me right, and Neil Murray's bass is also really good. But overall, this album just doesn't have a lot of memorable moments, and compared to everything else that Black Sabbath did, you pretty much see that this album is very overlooked. And what can I say? It's not really that good in my opinion. Moving on to number 17, the 1994 album Cross Purposes. Now, there is only one reason why I put this above the previous two albums, and that is the freaking song Evil Eye. Evil Eye is just a freaking amazing song, and it features Eddie Van Halen out of all people. And he actually wrote a guitar solo that freaking kicks butt, and I love it so gosh darn much. The iconic duo of Eddie Van Halen and Tony Iommi on the guitars. And did I mention that Tony Martin sounds absolutely amazing on this song? And, unfortunately, that's where the problem lies. Aside from Evil Eye, in my opinion, there is not a ton of songs on here that tickle my fantasy, if you will. I mean, there should have been songs that should have been left off, but thankfully you have a gem like Evil Eye that kind of saves this album from going dead last. But whatever. Okay. Moving on to number 16, the 1986 album Seventh Star. This was the only album to feature Glenn Hughes on vocals, and this followed up Born Again, which was a fairly enjoyable album. Glenn Hughes is an okay singer in my opinion, but this was really meant to be a Tony Iommi solo album. I don't know why. I don't really understand why he recorded it under the Black Sabbath label. But unfortunately, outside of that, and plus with TYR and Forbidden, there's not really a lot of memorable songs on here. I feel like Tony Iommi is a great songwriter for music stuff. But Geezer Butler's mainly for the lyrics. I mean, it's kind of hard to describe Seventh Star. It was meant to be a Tony Iommi solo album, but they recorded it as a Black Sabbath album instead. And like with Forbidden, this just doesn't feel like a Black Sabbath album in my opinion. So, Seventh Star from 1986 coming here at number 16. Number 15 is Born Again from 1983. Okay, this was the only album to feature Ian Gillan on vocals. You would know him from his work with Deep Purple. There are some really good songs on this album, like the song Trashed is a pretty good song. Disturbing the Priest is also a good gem off of this album, the title track as well. But this album just suffers from the horrible album cover to some of the songs not really going together except for those 3 songs that I mentioned. And Ian Gillan's vocals doesn't really fit. I mean, when Black Sabbath was choosing, because at this point Ronnie James Dio left the band to do his own work. And they were looking for a new singer. Among Ian Gillan, you also had Robert Plant, and Michael Bolton, believe it or not. What a match made in heaven that would be. What a match made in heaven that would have been. Excuse me. But yeah, this album is just meh, in my opinion. It's not a bad album. It's not a good album either. It's just kind of there in the middle, but it does have 3 amazing tracks, and the title track, Disturbing the Priest, and of course Trashed, 3 songs that I will come back to if I ever even think about returning back to this album, which, let's be honest, when it comes to the Black Sabbath catalog, this is not really one of those albums I would think about coming back to. Okay, moving on to number 14. Number 14, sorry. Number 14 is the 1978 album Never Say Die. This is my least favorite album of the Ozzy Osbourne era, and like with the Tony Martin era with Forbidden, Ozzy went out on a very, very sour note. I mean, but the title track's great. The opener is a freaking amazing song. I mean, it's catchy, it's lighthearted-ish, kind of reminds you of Paranoid, but the rest of the album does not really go in that same direction. But the glorious title track definitely gets it up a spot this high. Moving on to number 13, the 1976 album Technical Ecstasy. What a name that is. This album is a little bit like Never Say Die. But this album came out 2 years before Never Say Die, so like with Seven Star, this is a very weird album, and to follow up a gem of an album that was Sabotage, it falls way short. And, you know, Ozzy and the band, at this point, you could tell that the band was kind of on the decline, and that would eventually lead them to Never Say Die. This is just a very uninspired album, in my opinion, but it's not as uninspired as some of the other albums I've talked about. This album is just one of those albums that it's there in the catalog, and it's just kind of sits there. Moving on to number 12. Holy jeez. Okay, number 12, the 1992 album Dehumanizer. This is definitely my least favorite album of the Ronnie James Dio era, and I love Dio. He's another one of my favorite metal vocalists. But, you know, and this would definitely be at a lot of Black Sabbath fans' least favorite for the Dio era. It's kind of understandable in my opinion. I think this album has a title track. The title track's good. It's really outside of that. There's not really a lot that tickles my fantasy, and Dio just doesn't really sound that great in my opinion on here. And, you know, this was the first time since the 1981 album Mob Rules that Dio was featured on a Black Sabbath album. And it's kind of disappointing that Sabbath Dio fans have been waiting, 11 years? For Dio to come back with them and do an album. And then you get Dehumanizer, which is okay, but really nothing else more than okay. It does have some great songs, like the title track, if there is one. You see, that just goes to show you. I mean, this is one of those albums that, you know, it's just kind of there, kind of like with Technical Ecstasy. It's just kind of there. But I bet you there are some really great songs on this album. Definitely an underrated album, I feel. So Black Sabbath, Dehumanizer coming in at number 12. And finally, wrapping up part 1, the 1987 album, The Eternal Idol, coming in at number 11. This was the first album of the Tony Martin era, and he freaking smokes it on this album. I love this album, and I love the concept behind the album cover. So apparently the album cover was just a photo of two people in a very strange type of paint, which ended up turning out to be toxic, and they had to be rushed to the hospital to get the paint off. So I found that interesting. And this is an interesting album, too. It's actually my number 10 favorite album from 1987. It's a really good album, in my opinion. Tony Martin freaking smokes it. Cozy Powell from Whitesnake, he does an amazing job on the drums. And Tony Iommi is, of course, kicks butt on the freaking guitar, as he usually does on a Black Sabbath album. But this is a really interesting album, and for that, I can't help but freaking enjoy this album. So, number 11, The Eternal Idol from 1987. And so that will conclude part 1 of my Black Sabbath album rankings. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.